UFC Vegas 59 is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. We're going to talk about some strategy and we're going to build some lineups. So make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. We need a strong week. Last week was a 10-8 round, and I'll tell you, I only got the 8. And I feel like this is a great card to do it because there's only 12 fights, pricing is tight, the underdogs don't look great, so this is a week where I'm going to take a more conservative approach because I don't think taking a lot of risks on this card is going to pay off. And since we don't have any injuries, we can get right into the value plays, but if you haven't already, go back and watch the video from earlier in the week that'll be linked in the top of the description. Now our value plays at 8,000 and below starts right at the top with Stephanie Egger this week. I think the women's underdogs in this card are very live, and with Egger being the most expensive, I think the women's underdogs on this card are very live, and I think that Stephanie Egger, being the most expensive one of them, probably has the best chance of winning. I don't love Bueno Silva in this fight. I tried to talk myself into that side, but I just could not. I expect us to see her plotting forward, throwing decent combinations, but ultimately getting out-clinched and taken down in this fight. And I expect that if you're rostering Bueno Silva this week, you're going to get frustrated because she's going to be trying to play her jiu-jitsu from her back longer than she probably should be. And to be fair, that might work because Stephanie Egger is going to be in top position, aggressively looking for an armbar or something like that. She could end up getting reversed, put in a bad position, submitted on the mat. Anything could happen. But ultimately, I think the most likely outcome in this fight is that Stephanie Egger gets takedowns, control time, strikes from a dominant position, and she scores you around 85 points in a decision win, which is probably enough at this price and probably enough this week. That's decent value for Stephanie Egger. I think a spot that has a little bit more upside, though, is our next value play at 7,800. Priscilla Cachoeira as an underdog. Say what you want about her record, say what you want about the decision in her last fight, or how her and I have the same haircut. You could say whatever you'd like. But what you can't say is that Priscilla Cachoeira does not fight for your money. Like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, I really like the power and I like the chin of Priscilla Cachoeira because I do think that this fight's largely going to be on the feet. I think these two are going to get after it right away. I think they're going to throw big punches, and I think this fight doesn't go the distance. I think Priscilla Cachoeira is going to be able to knock out Ariane Lipski, especially if we get into the third round, because we know Priscilla Cachoeira can fight hard even late. Another area where I think she's going to have success is I think on the break when they're in the clinch, she's going to break and she's going to land hooks there, and I could see her stealing rounds if she lands bigger shots in those moments. And she has a ridiculous chin, so I think there's a lot to like about Priscilla Cachoeira this week at 7,800 and probably slightly lower owned than Stephanie Egger. Next at 7,700 we have Jeff Neal. This is the sneaky one. This is the ankle breaker. Jeff Neal is being heavily slept on, and I know this is not a good matchup, and it's not just a bad matchup for Jeff Neal, it's a bad matchup for anybody in the division. Well, everyone except for Bilal Muhammad. So don't be surprised if Vicente Luque ends up being the most heavily owned fighter on this entire slate. But Jeff Neal, like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, he has ridiculous power. It's still there. Jeff Neal is still the same guy that knocked out Mike Perry, the only guy that knocked out Mike Perry. He's the same guy that had a crazy stretch when he started his UFC run with 5 wins, 4 finishes. So you gotta respect it. And I gotta forgive the loss against Wonder Boy. Vicente Luque has one himself. And I gotta forgive the loss against Neil Magny. It's a bad matchup. I think that Jeff Neal has the power to at least hurt Luque, and maybe that's gonna steal rounds, or he's gonna put him out. I know that Vicente Luque has that ridiculous chin, but I do think that Jeff Neal has the power. And the thing about Luque is that he gets in your face, he wants to brawl, and if he starts fast when Jeff Neal is at his freshest, he hits his hardest, that's gonna be bad, like chili on the carpet type bad.
I'm serious about this stuff.
And I think that Jeff Neal has the power to KO anyone in this division. I think that is what we see this week. That is my long shot, and that's where we get sneaky but also conservative. He's not the cheapest of underdogs, but he's probably not going to be nearly as highly owned as Vicente Luque. This won't be a situation where they're both around 35-40%. I think Luque is going to come in around 50, 60, 70%, and you see Jeff Neal around 20. So really good value there with the knockout upside. And then the last value spot, because again, there aren't too many on this card, is with $7,600 Jason Witt this week. I'm going to ask you this question, and I want you to respond in the comments. If Jason Witt was 50% less chinny, would you like him in this matchup? Most of you are probably going to say that you would, and I would agree. Because when you look at the experience of Jason Witt, you look at the wrestling that Jason Witt brings to the table, you look at what he can score on Draftkings because of the takedowns. On the other side, you have Josh Quinlan making his UFC debut, doesn't have that many fights, massive step up in competition. This would be a Jason Witt smash spot, but but unfortunately the smash spot is located right on Jason Witt's chin, and that's the problem. The man can be KO'd at any point. We've seen that many times before, so it is scary going with Jason Witt, but his value is undeniable with the way that this fight needs to look for him to win. I don't think this fight goes the distance either way. I think you're either going to need the Quinlan side or the Witt side, so when we build lineups we'll work with both, but I'm going to go with Jason Witt, going out on another limb here because that's it. There's no other underdogs that I think have a real shot. But now we'll use these pieces to build our lineups, but before we do, please make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. Now we can build some lineups. When it comes to cash games this week, I don't think that you stack the main event. I don't think stacking the main event is going to make a lot of sense this week, considering that Jamahal Hill probably knocks out Thiago Santos before the third round. What you could do this week is you could come all the way up to Terrance McKinney. Because the pricing is tight, you would have to punt somebody lower in salary than the ones that we looked at if you wanted this to work. So what you'd have to do is you have to come down here and grab somebody like $7,300 Muhammad Usman. The thing about the Usman play, I know that I said it wasn't great earlier, and I still think that Zach Pauga probably pieces him up and wins a decision, but Pauga's not a guy who has crushing power. Usman's a tough guy himself. He was taking big shots from Brandon Sales before he got put down, so you got to think that the chin might be there. This could end up being a very close fight, and the way that the judging is, you never really know. So if it's a close fight, comes down to a split decision, Muhammad Usman could win, or you're just punting a guy who probably doesn't get knocked out in this spot, and he ends up having 3 rounds worth of points scored even if he doesn't get the win. Like, that's something to consider when you're playing your cash games. If you're punting and you're playing somebody who's really cheap, don't just play somebody because they're super cheap. What you want to do is try your best to play somebody who's not only super cheap, but probably goes the distance, because if you have a guy who got knocked out in the first round and scored 2 points versus somebody who went to the third round and scored 35 points, that's a huge difference. So Muhammad Usman probably loses, but probably doesn't get finished. I don't mind punting him all the way down there because it makes everything else work. So for example, we can come all the way up here to 8,800 Sergey Spivak. We can grab Bryan Battle. Now you see the salary that we have left per fighter. It's a lot lower, so we're going to have to come down here and then grab another underdog like Jeff Neal. This puts us in a position where we're playing Stephanie Egger. You're probably stuck playing 3 underdogs for the most part this week, unless you want to take out Terrance McKinney, grab somebody like Jamahal Hill in his place. But let's say you still wanted to go the McKinney route. Well, you can take Jamahal Hill out, you can put Terrance McKinney in there, but you didn't like the Neal side of the Neal-Luque matchup. Then you can take Neal out, and then you could put Luque in his spot. I know it says minus 800 salary, but if you hit submit enough times, it'll let you put the lineup in. That's a joke. What we need to do is take out one of these more expensive guys. So let's say, for example, we took out Bryan Battle. Now you're down here, and it's not like you can stack up the Neal fight, so you're looking at a situation where I would either play Cachoeira or I'd play Jason Witt. Now here's a situation where Jason Witt could get knocked out in the first minute and Priscilla Cachoeira can lose a decision and she's going to score more points. But if we want to be consistent and we want to play the fighter who has a safer floor, I prefer Priscilla Cachoeira over Jason Witt in a situation like this. And of course, instead, if you wanted to go ahead and roster the main event and Terrance McKinney in cash, I'll show you what that would look like. You basically just throw Jamahal Hill in there and then you throw Jason Witt in there and you're all set. This is another way that you could approach it if you wanted to go Stephanie Egger, Luque, Witt, Hill, Usman, McKinney. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think that this makes a lot of sense even if you wanted to plug it into some tournaments if you had any hope in Muhammad Usman. And we can look at what tournament lineups look like now. So if we blow all that up, I'm going to start with what a lot of your competition will probably look like this week in tournaments. You probably see a good amount of this week, especially in the bigger contests. You've got Terrance McKinney, knockout guaranteed. You have Jamahal Hill, who I think also is probably a guaranteed knockout. Miranda Granger, I think, is going to get a lot of love this week. In terms of cheap underdogs, I think Muhammad Usman gets a lot of love this week. Of course, people are going to be on Vicente Luque, and a lot of people expect Jason Witt to get knocked out yet again. I don't mind this at all. If this is something that you played in like your single entry contests, things like that, I think this would be fine. I don't love the Miranda Granger pick. I don't love the Muhammad Usman pick, but I do think that this is a lineup that a lot of people will run, especially in the bigger contests, but I think in some of your single entries, you could make something happen with something like this. Now, if I were to make some changes, I'd probably again go the other way in the Luque matchup for that leverage, for that knockout upside. I think that Jeff Neal could surprise a lot of people. I wouldn't let it rest this way though. I would definitely take out Muhammad Usman and then I'd put in somebody like Stephanie Egger. I wouldn't mind running this because you're basically taking a flyer on Miranda Granger and you're probably going to need one this week. But if we worked harder to get a lineup closer to one that involved a lot of the value plays that we talked about, we could play Jason Witt, Jeff Neal, Priscilla Cachoeira, and Stephanie Egger all in the same lineup, hear me out. Jamal Hill, Terrance, McKinney, and we've left 400 salary on the table. We've played 4 underdogs. This is how you get weird. Now, if you wanted to, I think you can slightly improve your position on Stephanie Egger if you came up here to Juliana Miller. If Juliana Miller wins, it's because of her grappling. It's probably one-way traffic, and she probably finds a submission at some point or just a ton of control time. This is another way that I think makes sense approaching it this week. Now, if you didn't play those guys right at the very top and instead you went with an approach like Sergey Spivak, you've got Bryan Battle, and then you come here to somebody like Jason Witt, Jeff Neal. If I were in this situation, I'd probably still go back to Stephanie Egger. That way we could afford Jamal Hill. And we'll look at props in just a second, but before we do, we're going to look at over-owned and under-owned fighters this week. Now, the 3 fighters that I think go over-owned this week, and when I say over-owned, it's not just that they're going to pull a ton of ownership, but their score might not be warranting that kind of ownership. Like, for example, I expect Terrance McKinney and Jamal Hill to be the highest owned fighters on the slate this week, but I don't think they're going to be over-owned. I think you'll probably need those guys. And also keep in mind that a lot of the ownership is either with heavy favorites like McKinney or Hill, or it's all the way down here in the salary on underdogs that are cheap that people are going to flock to. The first over-owned fighter by far is probably going to be Muhammad Usman at 7,300. Muhammad Usman might end up winning this fight, might end up winning it by decision, scoring around 65, 75 points, and really nothing to write home about. I think a lot of people are going to come here for the name. I think they're going to come here for the price, but realistically, Muhammad Usman, at least from what I've seen, is not that great. So I expect Muhammad Usman to go over-owned. Our next over-owned fighter, I think, is going to be Takashi Sato. I think a lot of people are going to get here for the knockout threat, and that makes sense. But like we talked about in the video earlier in the week, I just don't see Bryan Battle getting knocked out really anytime soon. Takashi Sato is an absolute liability on the mat, and he's dead to me. He's completely dead to me. He's on the burger list. Don't be surprised when Takashi Sato is popping up at 33% ownership in most of your contests. And the next fighter that I expect to go over-owned this week is going to be right up here at 8,500. Who's passing up an $8,500 Vicente Luque? Not many people, but let me tell you, if he doesn't finish Jeff Neal, he's not going to score many points. Luque rocks people. He drops people. He catches people with submissions. But he doesn't grind on people. He doesn't shoot a lot of takedowns. And realistically, when you look at his last decision win against Mike Perry, who Jeff Neal knocked out, then you're looking at a situation where he only scored 64 points. Jeff Neal's a tough guy. I don't think that Jeff Neal's going to get knocked out this week, even if he does lose. You're going to see a lot of people playing Vicente Luque this week, and if he wins and scores around 72 points, people are going to be annoyed. Now, for the fighters that are going to go under-owned, and I don't know if this is necessarily a great thing, but Cory McKenna goes under-owned this week. Historically, she hasn't scored very well in the few fights that she's had in the UFC. You really like the output. You like that Miranda Granger accepts bottom. You like that she doesn't defend a takedown well, and you like that Cory McKenna is going to look for takedowns. Does she break 100 points this week? I think it would be tough, but I don't think it would be impossible. And at the same time, she's giving up a lot of height. She's giving up a ton of reach, so you do worry about her on the feet. Not like Miranda Granger's this great striker on the feet, but that's a huge difference, and it's something that you need to consider. But Cory McKenna definitely goes under-owned this week. Another fighter that I think goes under-owned this week is right here with Juliana Miller at 8,300. Again, Juliana Miller is going to win this fight one way and one way only, and that's getting her opponent to the mat. And if she does that, that is very fantasy friendly. As you know, takedowns are scored higher than any other metric. So if she's getting takedowns, control time, finds a submission, she definitely shows up on the optimal lineup. You got guys like McKinney, Hill, Luque, all priced above her that are going to hold down her ownership. Don't be surprised when Juliana Miller scores a ton of points or gets beat up, whichever comes first. And then the last fighter that I see going under-owned this week is actually Augusto Sakai, and he is an underdog, but I do think that he goes under-owned. He's riding a 3-fight knockout losing streak, and now he's fighting a guy that's going to be able to take him down with ease and probably finish him within the first round. I'm not that high on Augusto Sakai this week, but I don't think a lot of people are going to get here. It's heavyweight MMA. He is a willing striker. He's got fast hands, so you could see a situation where he catches Spivak, puts him out Walt Harris style, and he probably comes in at around 15 to 18% ownership in most of your contests, maybe even less. I could be way off the mark. People could love Augusto Sakai this week, but I don't think that there are many people like that out there. Now we'll look at round props. There are a few opportunities that I like this week. There are a couple of them that are obviously just a given given like Terrance McKinney under a round and a half. Under a round and a half for the Bryan battle Takashi Sato fight. Under 2.5 rounds for Sergey Spivak Augusto Sakai. Over a round and a half in the Sam Alvey Oleksiejzuk fight. And then I think if you wanted to come up here to say minus 290 for Cory McKenna, Miranda Granger, I don't think that's a bad look. Now in terms of fighter props, if you went here to Terrance McKinney, let's find out what Terrance McKinney inside the first round is. Terrance McKinney to win by knockout in the first round is plus 150. Terrance McKinney round 1 sits at minus 165, and I think that's probably the smartest spot to be. When I say smartest, I mean much smarter than if you were to go with Terrance McKinney by first round knockout. It's plus 150, it's much better odds, but you're looking at a situation where Terrance McKinney is going to be able to do whatever he wants. Well, if he wants this guy in the ground and wants to submit him, he's going to do exactly that. You go to the main event, you look at Jamal Hill. If you go to Jamal Hill by knockout, it's minus 165, very similar. If you go to the Juliana Miller fight and we see what her prop is by submission, I bet that would look good. We've got plus 500, come on. And then if we go to the Zach Pauga Muhammad Usman fight, you've got Muhammad Usman at plus 210, but I think I would prefer Zach Pauga by decision at plus 165. Now I'll quickly run through the card for you. I've got Jamal Hill by knockout, Jeff Neal by knockout, Pauga by decision, Juliana Miller by submission. I've got Sergey Spivak inside the distance, Cachoeira by decision, Oleksiejzuk by decision, Terrance McKinney knockout, Bryan battle inside the distance. I like Jason Witt inside the distance in this fight. I think that Cory McKenna goes the distance and wins a decision, and then I think Stephanie Egger probably finds herself in a decision win as well. If you've gotten to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment for the algorithm, and let's get ready for this week.